We're moving over to the left side now, Senator, just so you know.
That's my right, though, just for the record.
My name is Will Matheson. I live in Orem, and I'm a moderate Democrat who's concerned about the national debt. The three biggest parts of our debt are Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, and I was wondering, how do you plan on working with Democrats in addressing that? It's really important to me.
Thank you, Will, and thanks for coming tonight. I completely agree with you. Our national debt is of greatest concern to us. It wasn't very long ago that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, said that our greatest threat to our American national security is, in fact, our national debt. You know what's interesting is that currently on our national debt we pay about $225 billion a year just to service that debt. That's just our interest obligation. $225 billion a year. That is a lot of money. That's money that goes back to our creditors. It's money that we can't use for things like, military equipment, military personnel, or other operations of government. But the interesting thing about that is that that's the same amount that we were paying in interest 15 or 20 years ago, when our national debt was a third or fourth or even a fifth of its current size. The reason for that has to do with the fact that our Treasury yield rates, the interest rate that we pay on our national debt, is at all-time historical lows. What's going to happen when a few years, when all of a sudden our Treasury yield rate, the interest rate we pay on our national debt, goes back up just to historical norms, just to the historical average, even assuming we don't have a rebound above that? Within a short period of time, instead of $225 billion a year, we'll be paying $1 trillion a year in interest. We're going to have to come up with that $800 billion shortfall somewhere. That $800 billion shortfall, that's about what we spend on Medicare and Medicaid. And we're not going to be able to afford anything that we need to do at that point. Some will say at that point, well, just raise taxes. You can't close that. There's not a tax increase that is conceivable that could raise that amount of money, at least not without simultaneously decimating the American economy. And probably you'd have both problems. You wouldn't close the gap, and you would shrink economic growth to the point where you'd have less money rather than more. We could borrow more, but then our yield rate would go up higher, and instead of a $1 trillion annual payment, we'd have a $2 trillion annual payment. We could print more, but most people regard that as immoral, because that's a backdoor, almost invisible tax increase on the poor. And other countries have tried it. I think it's a bad idea here, and to the extent we've done it, America's poor have suffered. The only other option at that point would be to cut big time, cut almost everything, cut to a degree that would make what happened with sequestration look like nothing. That's what I worry about, because that's going to hurt the poor. And so in order to preserve our ability to fund Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other programs that people have come to rely on over time, we've got to start making modest adjustments now. I've done that. It was one of the first things I did when I got to the United States Senate. It got almost no press coverage. For whatever reason, people didn't regard it as a sexy issue. But a couple of my colleagues and I came up with a solution that would render Social Security solvent over the 75-year window. We came up with another one that would do that with respect to Medicare, all without touching benefits at all for those who are currently retired or approaching retirement age, within 10 years of retirement age. I came up then last year with my Saving the American Dream plan, which had a tweaked, new and improved approach toward preserving all of those programs and making sure that we can fund them, making sure they're protected against the kind of eventualities that I described, while simultaneously bringing our budget to balance over a 5-year window. My point is that we can get there, Will. We really can. But there has to be more discussion of this. When we brought forward each of these proposals, it was very, very difficult to get co-sponsors. It was very difficult to get anyone to vote for it, just because people are content with the status quo. What they've got to hear from the American people, and they're hearing it plenty, they'll hear it more, is that the status quo won't work, is that the status quo will run us into bankruptcy. The status quo, most importantly, will hurt the poor and the vulnerable more than anything else we could do.